What up, y'all? It is Anti-Negative here, back with another episode of Magic the Blabbering. This week, we're going to kind of change things up a little bit, given that the climate right now with Magic is pretty negative, I would say. And I'm getting pretty tired out on just like the rhetoric of universe beyond this and that, and WotC in general. Overall, it's just all really samey. Everybody's talking about the same thing. What I will say about it is if you want WotC to do anything differently, vote with your wallet. Don't buy boxes, buy singles, or, you know, play digitally, play MTGA instead of playing in paper because you don't support it. Either way, you know, better for everybody's mental stability to just not be super enveloped in something that a big corporation's doing. So anyways, in general, I want this podcast to kind of like be talking about Magic and just having fun and, you know, talking about things that I like and, you know, point out things that are cool about Magic or whatever, starting discourse on things. As always, I'm always willing to hear everybody's side of the story. You know, sometimes I have kind of a polarizing take on stuff, or we're talking about polarizing subjects. So, you know, always willing to hear anybody's side of any of the stories here. Or just like if you have a different take about something I'm talking about, always willing to discuss that in the comments. And I also wanted to thank everybody for subscribing and just kind of coming through. It's been pretty awesome seeing, you know, the support for the content here. We broke 1K subscribers, so I thought that was pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, really not much else to say besides thank you, and you know, more content's coming. And thank you for anybody who's been listening to it and enjoying the vibe so far. Again, you know, we're just gonna try to keep it positive here and, you know, keep it pretty apolitical. I don't really want to talk about current event stuff or like who's doing what now, what we're outraged about, whether it be political or, you know, about WotC. Just kind of want to talk about some different stuff. It's so drained and draining, not only for everybody else, but for me for sure. So just want to make that pretty clear here. And then for the podcast in general, we're going to be moving all the brews of the week to the end, or from the end of this podcast to a separate video that we'll be releasing on Fridays. Wednesday is going to be the day for the podcast releases, but yeah, so that's going to be the vibe here. All right, so what's the topic for today? And as you can see from the title, the season of Izzet is almost over. I would call it Izzet Summer, but it started a little bit earlier than that, and it's ending a little bit later than that. So it's like multiple seasons of Izzet at this point. It started back in Tarkir with CORI still, and it's been going on since then. So it's been a little bit grueling. You know, I had fun playing my different versions of those decks as well. CORI still was it's a fun card, and, you know, and the formats that it's like, you know, illegal, but also doesn't just completely dominate the format. It's really fun, and it's, you know, definitely a card that was too strong for standard. But, you know, that's kind of the overall vibe for today. Let's talk about what does Izzet do? Like, why is Izzet so good when it is good? And just talk about some of the overall vibes for Izzet in general, like the archetypes and like some of the reasoning behind what happens when Izzet is good. Is it good? Yes, it is. You know, it's a very easy thing for Izzet to be good. Sometimes there are long stints of it just being unplayable, as it was in standard before CORI still popped in. And we had some other versions of, you know, Storm Chaser's talent and like Prowess and stuff like that kind of like work its way through the system here. But overall, it was really tame. There was a lot of mid-range decks and really, really good removal, like Cut Down. You know, it can't be stated enough how good Cut Down was. just in terms of regulating the meta, but also just making sure that, you know, black decks could do their thing and anything that was splashing black could slow down other game plans. That's not just making like dimir midrange super viable. It's also regulating certain decks so they don't completely dominate a meta. And, you know, that's pretty evident with how standard evolved after the mass bannings, where they removed not only CORI still, but as everyone saw, Heartfire Hero, Beans got hit, Hopeless Nightmare, a bunch of things from the bounce decks, and you know, this town ain't big enough. All that stuff took a hit, and it was, you know, looking back at it, and I said this a few times to different people when talking about the bans, was that they just kind of king made the dimir deck like overnight, and it really was the case, because right when they banned it, and this was back in like, you know, end of June, early July, they banned all that stuff, and the meta opened up, you know, Final Fantasy cards, other than, you know, VIVI had like a little moment to be played, and they still are finding homes. Like Final Fantasy was a very good set. And like, that's not even just saying like how well it sold. It's just, there's a lot of really good standalone cards, for the most part in general. And that's one of the really good things about the design direction of Final Fantasy. There wasn't any like, I mean, there was a few like things that care about towns. But overall it wasn't like a thing where you had the entire set caring about certain keywords or, you know, etc., which is a little bit odd for sets, because sets usually do carry a keyword throughout them. But overall, I thought it was really good because those individual cards can fuel archetypes, you know, like say like Kafka, we have Squall, Lightning. Those are all just like in different color pairings as well. It's like, those are really good for what they are. Then we have VIVI, obviously, most broken card in the set. But yeah, so really, really good set. Just wanted to give that a little bit of a shout out. Personally, what I feel for design is keywords are great, but it is also really good when cards just do something really good and they don't have to be super tied to some type of mechanic, etc. You know, one of the reasons why Kaido is so good is that Kaido, where it can buff up ninjas, obviously, it doesn't need ninjas to be good. It is a planeswalker that can be played at instant speed, tapped and attacking. So it's very, very good, just from its inception to its implementation as well. You know, just very, very solid design on that. And that's what we want to get for cards. We don't want them to, you know, just be super tied to any certain like deck build or whatever. But anyways, getting back on topic here. So CORI still, you know, came and went. It had like a good 2 months in standard. It was the meta for those months that it was legal. But, you know, it definitely felt lopsided. And why did CORI still feel so good? And this, we're going to also talk about like, Izzet VIVI as well, and just like other Izzet archetypes. But there's a couple things that happen when Izzet specifically is very good. It brings with it, one, aggression. So Izzet has red as one of its main colors, obviously. Two colors, red and blue. Red is the aggression. Red is CORI still. Red is Monastery Swiftspear. Red is all the different removal types that it could have with different burn elements. It could have burn as well. And in older formats, it definitely has stuff like lightning bolts, and other different like really premium one drops other than like something like Swiftspear. But yeah, when you pair that with the other thing that blue does super well, which is obviously counter spells and draw spells, then you create this dynamic where not only am I dumping my hand onto the field and making you have to answer every threat that I put down, I am also refilling my hand while doing it. And that is really tied to the keyword prowess. Prowess in particular is a very lopsided mechanic in terms of like just from a like a perspective of like how does this synergize with certain things. It is very, very general. So saying non-creature, it means pretty much everything. It means that when it's anything that's not a creature, so that's all the things other than, you know, playing a land, whatever. So enchantments, you know, artifacts, planeswalkers, you name it. Anything that's not a creature, that triggers prowess. Prowess gives +1 till end of turn. So you can chain together a bunch of 1 mana draw spells in order to both filter and draw cards while giving your field, everything that you played, extra power. So that means turn 1, 2, you can set up your entire field to have all these threats lined up. And then turn 3, all of a sudden you're swinging for like 9 to 12 damage. And that happens seemingly out of nowhere, incidentally, because you're just drawing cards. And that's something that Izzet does super well. Pretty much every iteration of Izzet, including expressive iteration, which is another really good Izzet card, it does this stuff incidentally. It doesn't do it with like the intention of like, okay, I really need to find these cards. Like, no, there's a bunch of 1 mana draw spells, bunch of 1 mana, you know, look at the top card of your library. Like sleight of hand is like baby ponder in certain ways. And it's not ponder. It's not get that confused. But even sorcery speed 1 mana cantrips in particular have the same level of, you know, threat to them. Where a seemingly non-threatening card is just allowing you to filter your deck and fill up your hand, it now becomes a gigantic threat. So I'm sure everybody who's played against Izzet has felt that type of like anxiety when you're just seeing them just draw cards and then hit you for like 6. Because you know that eventually at the end of that card draw train, which this was the case with CORI still, well, they would, you know, play Monastery Swiftspear. It's like perfect turn 3 for them. You play CORI still in turn 2, they tapped out. You know, they're not doing anything. Turn 3, they play a Monastery Swiftspear and a draw spell. All of a sudden, they have 2 prowess creatures. And then they swing, they have Monstrous Rage in hand. And all of a sudden, you're taking 9 out of nowhere. And pretty much dead. So, you know, that was a very interesting time. I'm definitely a big fan of Izzet as well, you know, but that for standard, you know, you have to balance that type of gameplay with equal and effective answers. And standard, while they had cut down and things like that, prowess is one of those things that could actually just get around that very efficiently and very consistently. So it wasn't a good answer to have that perfect 1 mana removal spell that we had in standard. The only thing I could deal with that is like Fatal Push. But even then, you know, it might not even deal with something like CORI still, which, you know, in Pioneer and in like Modern, CORI still can still run out of control and it completely takes over games. And we're comparing this to Modern Horizons 3 cards. We're comparing this to like Rakdos midrange with Fable and every single 1 mana removal spell under the sun. So CORI still can still do exactly what it was banned for. And that's creating both, you know, a insurmountable like prowess source and the ability to turn your 1 mana cantrips into aggression, into power. So that's kind of the long and short of like what happens when Izzet aggro is very, very good, because those two things come together very easily. And it's similar, if anybody knows like metas as they pass on, control, when a rotation happens, control is not really possible. Why is control not possible? It's because there's not enough interaction. It could be that there's not enough good counter spells. It could be that there's not enough like board wipes. There's no payoffs for those big control decks. It takes at least a couple sets of both those things filtering in for blue to get the sum of the parts that they need in order to fuel a deck that's fully control, where blue ends up usually needing like 1 to 2 more colors in order to fill in those gaps. Whereas like blue-white control has more counter spells like No More Lies. There's like Mana Leak, you know, and then also having Overlord the Mistmores, Beza, other things that can actually be the mid-range game plan for that control deck. So they have a way to win. Other iterations, it's been Teferi 5, which was a really good game plan. Wandering Emperor, another good game plan for them. Things that they can do once they've drained you out of resources. Now they're going to start winning on like turn 7, 8, you know, things like that. Because control is usually relying on their 1-for-1 removal spells to kind of just drain your hand. What's ironic with control versus Izzet is control really has to worry about what type of draw spell that the Izzet deck will, you know, like inevitably have, which is why CORI still couldn't be answered fully by temporary lockdown, because you had things like Into the Flood Maw and stuff like that where you can just bounce it and then end up winning the next turn, and or even High Noon for that matter. And yeah, so you know, relating those two things together again, it's like you need the sum of the parts. It eventually happens where these types of like aggro or tempo decks, you know, in the instance of Dimir mid-range and in the instance of Izzet CORI still, they both were, you know, the result of a bunch of different cards from different sets, all trying to do something for that color that eventually led to, this is just the best thing to do in this color. Monstrous Rage, Monastery Swiftspear, CORI still, and then Storm Chaser's Talent and a bunch of draw spells, including Stock Up. So, you know, it just became that's what you need to do. And you know, not a single one of those really was from the same set. They all come from multiple sets. So, you know, it's like that can only happen over the course of a year or 2 of sets, or a year and a half of sets, which, you know, incidentally, Monstrous Rage should have rotated, but it didn't because of the 3-year standard. So things ended up the way they did. And yeah, that's just kind of what happened there. And Izzet since then has been a minor problem. And I say minor lightly because we had a month of reprieve in between the bannings for July, which then Dimir was the king for a full month. Edge of Eternity came out, and then everything rotated, i.e. cut down. And then all of a sudden Izzet was back on top. And we had a better version of Izzet Cauldron with VIVI before the rotation with Voldaren Thrillseeker. What happened, though, is that some of the removal that was very, very efficient, like Go for the Throat, Cut Down, all those things that could answer a Mako on 1 or a FOMO, anything that, you know, you're playing Cauldron, you know, and then you need to put that first counter onto your fear of missing out, and then all of a sudden you can't do that because it's too easy for Cut Down to like snipe one of those creatures. So that's kind of what happened is like we had that regulation from those really good removal spells in Dimir. And once they were gone, people were thinking that Dimir would probably fall off, not be unplayable, but fall off a little bit. But what it ended up happening there is that it just allowed this type of deck to come through. And when you look at Izzet VIVI, it's doing similar things. This time it's not working so much with like an infinite prowess source, but one thing that is very, very common between the two colors, say within like red and blue, is that they both really care about artifacts. And so CORI still was a red artifact, and now Cauldron's an artifact. Cauldron is a colorless artifact, granted, but given that they both are abusing an artifact in some way and abusing their graveyard, that's something that Izzet does very classically. And it's not an unusual thing for Izzet to fall out of line just because it has some artifact or enchantment, you know, you name it, dealing with its graveyard because it can loot, you know, discard a card, draw a card, it can draw a bunch of cards, and it really cares about getting to a combo piece. That's what kind of happened with the Izzet Cauldron deck, is that not only was it, you know, playing Profs, which is an enchantment, and then also playing Cauldron, it's kind of asking you to answer those things again. So we're kind of in the same situation with CORI still with this, where it's giving you a ton of aggression. Then out of nowhere, there's a combo. So, you know, you put all those things together on top of having card draw, counter spells. Then you have like an actual threat that needs real answers. And in older formats, you would use blue to answer those things. Force of negation, force of will. Those all kind of exacerbate other problems. But incidentally, they regulate things like this. But yeah, so the big tying factor with where Izzet is with its archetypes for Izzet in standard is that it gives a ton of aggression and a ton of card draw. So it's able to refill its hand and then turn that card draw into aggression somehow. With profs, you're drawing cards and you're putting counters on creatures, and you know, then you have an infinite mana on turn 3, 4, and you're playing, you know, kind of 10 cards in one turn when you shouldn't be. So that would be designated as a combo, because Cauldron has comboed like this in the past with other things. It required, you know, 2 to 3 creatures underneath Cauldron, but with VIVI, it only needs 1. So that really sped up that combo, and it just kind of blew it out of proportion. But anyways, we might be at the end of that lifespan with Izzet, and I hope the balance team and design team, while they recognize that, you know, there's a lot of 1 mana issues when designing the cards for this long of a standard, because they all come together. Again, the sum of the parts. You know, when you have this long of a standard, when all those things come together, you know, then you have, you know, opt and sleight of hand in the same standard. Then you have stock up along with Winter Night Stories and, you know, all these different card draw spells that just let you kind of look through your entire deck and always find and consistently win in kind of the same way. But yeah. And then now we have with Edge of Eternity's Quantum Riddler, which is another huge breakout card. I remember seeing that card for the first time and be like, is this good? I'm not sure if this is good. It just kind of draws 1 card, but then, you know, it clicked pretty quickly that, yeah, no, this is definitely going to be very good, because you can just kind of play out your entire hand. And then this, if it's on the field, you draw 2 cards in your upkeep. You can draw 2 cards when you warp it. You can draw 2 cards when you're, you know, just name your position where you're drawing cards and you have none in hand or have 1. You know, this thing is going to draw you a ton of cards, and it's a 4/6 Sphinx. So it's huge. Very good card. I was only able to get like a couple copies for like $15, but you know, now it's 35. It's all good. Either way. Yeah, that's besides the point. But yeah, so just kind of tying that back together, we have card draw, deck filtering, cantrips with aggression, all tying back together for some kind of combo piece. And that's something that Izzet does super well. It has created a huge community around it. So a lot of people like Izzet. I personally really like Izzet. It's really fun to play. It's really exciting. Probably people will disagree with that. I'm sure there's a lot of people would agree with that. But yeah, there's a ton of ways to play Izzet in general. And, you know, it was like 4 or 5 years ago, we had an Izzet problem as well in standard with Alrund's Epiphany and Goldspan Dragon. And they were just take infinite turns. But, you know, compared to how fast standard is today, that deck wouldn't have been very good, because that deck is trying to do stuff on like turn 6, 7. And in this standard, that wouldn't have happened, because this is was a turn 3 format before they, you know, removed Monstrous Rage and Heartfire Hero. But yeah, so it's funny because those levels of aggression and card draw, deck filtering can only be matched by something either equally as oppressive in terms of like stacks pieces, or, you know, efficient removal, or a faster deck, a faster aggression, or a combo. So we don't really have those other things in standard, but what we do have is more aggression. So naturally, the only thing that can beat Izzet now with the Cauldron meta and with the CORI Steel meta was mono red and still is mono red. So, you know, maybe they'll take out a card from mono red. I don't think they will, but, you know, I think once the Cauldron meta dies down, it's very easy to hate on mono red. So I don't imagine that they ban anything from mono red. If they did, it would be Nemesis. But even that card is, you know, a 3 mana, 3/3 with haste. So it's hard to say whether or not that's reasonably bannable, but in my book, it's probably not there. Yeah, mainly because it's not an all-in-one win con. It's still a 3/3 with haste. But yeah, so the whole point of like understanding where this happens is to, in the future, you know, say if you're trying to build an Izzet deck or you're trying to build something tempo based or whatever like that. You know, these are lessons you can learn from Izzet just doing its thing repeatedly throughout the ages, I would say, and throughout formats right now, currently. Like if we look at like Modern right now, Modern has 2 very, very, very competitive Izzet decks, and one of them's CORI still, with like Mishra's Bauble and Dragon's Rage Chandler, you know, Expressive Iteration, that kind of stuff. It's like all these really, really efficient Izzet spells, and they're able to take down stuff from MH3. Like this is a deck that kind of dethroned Boros Energy a bit and regulated the meta, and it was the cheapest thing in Modern. So that's why Izzet's great. That's why we like when this stuff is playable, because not only is it like fun, but they tend to run generally cheaper, like as a whole, because most of the stuff that you would play is like a common cantrip with like a 1 mana, you know, aggressive creature. You might get a Ragavan every now and then, which is a mythic 1-drop. Obviously, mythic cards usually lend themselves to be $80 when they're really sought after. It's just a thing that happens with mythics. But yeah, so it's really, really efficient, really, really good. You know, and then you have other standard cards that are popping up in Modern. But like I was saying before, the other thing that it really does well, because it just happens to care about that thing in both colors, is artifacts. And, you know, artifact, either combo, affinity, you know, has been a thing for Izzet for a while. You have Emery of the Lock, which would mill yourself, and then you can like play an artifact out of your graveyard. That synergizes with Faithless Looting because you can, you know, draw some cards, put stuff into your graveyard, play it out of your graveyard. So it was really a very efficient engine. So yeah, now Izzet Affinity in Modern has turned into like a Pinnacle Emissary deck where you can like warp this guy for 1, play like a bunch of free spells, like a ton of free spells, like Mox Opal, Tormod's Crypt, some are running like Claws of Gix and stuff like that, or Memnite, and then you just make a ton of 1/1s. And then with your like Mox Opal, you can play out a Kappa Cannoneer. And so it's just like goes out of control, and it's all fueled by Pinnacle Emissary. And yeah, I mean, the deck is mostly blue cards, but you know, the really like tying factor is like it's red cards in there that really make it pop off. And that's usually going to be the case. A lot of other combo decks as well kind of work in the same way. And that's like the second really, really well, not the second. This is more like the fourth thing that it does super well together. This is just not, you know, we can do actually like a video about every single color combo. It's just really relevant right now for me personally, because it's been the whole standard meta. So let's just talk about Izzet. And okay, so for the final point on like what Izzet does super well, it's like other main archetype is combo. And combo decks in general, they need 2 things. They need card draw and they need a payoff. So, you know, in like Vintage, Legacy, those decks in there that are using these colors, if you know about anything from Vintage, pretty irrelevant format, you know, because no one's paying $50,000 for a deck. But a lot of them kind of revolve around Lurrus, of course, because you can play Underworld Breach from the graveyard with Lurrus. So, you know, but Underworld Breach is like the perfect example of like the perfect red card for every combo deck in general. So obviously you can't play every single tutor in the game, but red and blue both work together to either, you have things like breach, and then you have card draw spells that allow you to filter through your deck and then find your payoffs and your combo pieces to a very consistent degree. And then red kind of serves as either, your actual payoff. Say like an Underworld Breach deck that's a Storm deck is going to play either Brain Freeze or Grape Shot. And Grape Shot's a really good, payoff because you can just like keep on rebuying things, discard a ton of cards, draw a ton of cards, and just play, 20 spells in one turn and then Grape Shot them for 20, GG. And it's just been a really consistent thing that, Izzet as your base is kind of where you want to start with that. So like, if you look at the metagame for, Lurrus in general for Vintage, it's like there's a common Lurrus Breach deck right now that pretty much is trying to just play Breach and then eventually Brain Freeze your opponent until they, die. Ton of different ways to, both tutor stuff. So it's a Grixis deck. You can Demonic Tutor, draw a ton of cards because it's a Brainstorm format. And then Ancestral Recall, just like all the best stuff that you can possibly imagine. And then, have a ton of backup in terms of like Force of Will or like Mana Drain, all the best counter spells ever printed ever. And there's just like a ton of things that this deck can do that nobody else could ever pull off in any other color. And so like if your combo was based in green, say you're doing Channel Fireball, you're probably going to want to do Temur Fireball because you can use Force of Will to make sure that things get through. Obviously Channel Fireball is like the original combo deck. And it was like kind of like a like very quickly banned. There are other combo decks that kind of like popped up after that were much more roundabout. And those are the combo decks that are supported nowadays. Like the Golgari counter or combo deck that was able to like make a ton of mana with like squandered resources and then like drain life. Izzet as a whole, it's very malleable, and also it changes pretty much every single meta that it's in. Obviously in older formats, it gets very diluted down into the same types of payoffs with new enablers. But overall, the new iterations with it, say with like CORI still, say with VIVI, etc. It's not that they're bad. It's that they're too strong for standard. And that's really where, it needs to be, and I'm happy that the balance team, design team recognizes that and, albeit not fast enough, and hopefully they will, honor their word about changing the cadence of bans and stuff like that. So we don't have this huge waiting period of like, from August when everybody knew it was banned and it was like 40% of the meta, in not like a dimir kind of way, where once dimir lost that cut down, it was just night and day. They just kind of fell off the map. Again, not unplayable, but it really, really made it so it wasn't dimir format anymore. And everything got to play and the cream rose to the top. And it turns out that the VIVI Cauldron deck was the best thing to do. And that's not a knock to, it's not so much a knock to VIVI as it is to the format needing to be regulated. Standard has a wide variety of decks that can be played, wide variety of players at all different skill levels. Having a deck like VIVI or CORI still in the meta is not healthy for, both a new player base or just a wide variety of decks, because for everything to be playing out what they're playing at, especially with CORI still, it was, the only other deck that was at that level was already very power crept. So, to have other things meet that level of power creep, that's not standard anymore. Now we're making modern 2. And a lot of people would argue that standard is modern 2 and that Standard is Pioneer Horizons, which, you know, unfortunately people don't care enough about Pioneer. Yeah, it's a fun color pie to play because there's so many different things you can do with it. Again, it's not bad, you know, but when you're force fed the same thing for a certain amount of time, it gets very tiring, gets very draining. When the design balance team doesn't want to do anything about it, it definitely limits you from what you want to do. And, you know, again, when Izzet's really good, you need really good answers for it. You know, one of the like more defining things about Izzet is that its threats can be so varied and so differed between both enchantments, artifacts, creatures, that there's really no one catch-all for Izzet's game plan. So it ends up taking over the game in some different way. In the past, though, you know, again, we're dealing with like Splinter Twin types of combos, which is an Izzet deck, by the way. It would play Splinter Twin Aura on Deceiver Exarch or Pestermite, and then it would copy a blue creature. That was a red enchantment that copied a blue creature. And it would untap that thing with Splinter Twin and then go infinite. But this combo would usually happen on like turn 4. And, you know, people didn't like that because they were like, well, you know, it could even happen on, no, it need to happen on turn 4 because that's how much Splinter Twin costs. And yeah, people generally did not like the inevitability of that deck. So even if it happened turn 4 on their mega high roll hands, you know, it would just eventually happen at some point in the game, and it was always the same outcome. It was very boring. It was not something that everybody liked to play against. It was always fun, you know, to play, you know, for the person playing that type of combo. There's definitely a huge community that loves Splinter Twin. But yeah, so that's kind of where Izzet's at in general. It's like the whole vibe of Izzet is that you can both be the kind of sit back combo, draw cards, do nothing gamer, or you can be the aggro deck, swinging and drawing cards and doing all this stuff from turn 1. And yeah, so that's kind of where I want to talk about today. And, you know, don't want to drag it on for too long, but, you know, Izzet's a really healthy thing for the metagame. In the right format, it is more than welcome. In Standard, where it was pushed to, where it was power crept to, it was too strong. And hopefully we can have the end of the season of Izzet very soon here on November 10th. And yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. We're going to be doing more stuff like this in the future. And yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you like about Izzet if you do, or why you hate Izzet, or why you hate me talking about Izzet. But yeah, hope you guys have a good week. And there's going to be another video coming out very soon in a couple days here about top brews for Standard for the week. And some more brew videos in the works as well. And we'll try to get those out as soon as possible. All right. See ya.